Good morning, everybody. I have that cherished spot of, am I driving this? I also, yeah, okay. Sorry, they changed the opening slide for me. Of being the last speaker before lunch. So since the only thing that stands between you and good Stanford food is me, I asked my friend Jason Silva to join me. Where's the, to actually get us going here. Bye.
You know, I love this idea of radical openness, the free exchange of information, the free flow of ideas, creating spaces in which ideas can have sex, as Matt Ridley talks about.
Nobody else has talked about sex yet, have they? Just checking. Okay, stay with me. Because I'm also going to talk about power. In both, at least two senses of the world. There is tremendous power, there is tremendous potential to this era of data that we're living in. There's also great, great peril. Data can be quite powerful. You as evaluators, I hope, think a lot about power imbalances. And let me tell you, it is absolutely nothing short of magical thinking to think that data are going to narrow or lessen those power imbalances by themselves. If anything, they're going to make them much worse, even with our most deliberate efforts to do otherwise. I can't help but be the dinner guest you really regret inviting by pointing out that our gracious hosts today, FSG and SSIR, have demonstrated to me in a way I simply could not ignore the power dynamics related to digital data. I agreed to give this talk months ago, and after several conversations in which I said, I'm only going to do it if I can talk about the bad news. I'm only going to do it if I can talk about what to be worried about. And they said, yeah, that's great, that's what we want. Months ago, we talked about this. I'm talking about big data, I'm talking about data in an open environment, I'm talking about digital data, I'm talking about data collection and gathering, I'm talking to a bunch of evaluators who think about power. And last night, as I walked in here today, and last night via email, I was handed 2 release forms for the digital data that is this speech. Please turn off the camera. Please stop recording. I have not signed the release forms. This is my data. These are my ideas. I was invited here to speak with you, yet I am apparently going to sign over my rights to this information for my heirs. And again, last night in email, this morning when I walked in here, that's a power issue. That's a power issue in a digital data age. Thank you, FSG and SSIR, for the opportunity. Here's what I'm not going to talk about. Okay? Oh, good. Somebody, yeah, no, please don't talk about that. Here's what I am going to talk about: sex, power, and data. Because you are now doing your work in an environment where everything is digital. Everything that's digital can become data, and all your data can become digital. And for the most part, we have rushed into this with the enthusiasm of first sex. This is great. There's some downsides. And I don't know, I'm an historian by training. I don't know where we are in the cycle I'm about to describe, but we're somewhere on this path. This is the cycle that I see. This was actually a cycle that was first identified, at least as far as I know, by an historian at MIT who helped create the Science, Technology, and Society program at MIT back in the 60s. And he was studying the use of guns in naval warfare. And he talked about when you first have a breakthrough, you see something different about an existing technology and you find a new way to make it better, that those who are the real proponents of it are usually met with either scorn or they're ignored. And they keep proselytizing, and they keep proselytizing, and it's big data, folks. This is a great thing. Notice that, by the way, everything else that we preface with big is not usually a great thing. Big pharma, big government, big business. Big data, great thing. So they're met with either scorn or they're ignored. They keep going. Then they start to get met with some sort of reasoned and even rational opposition, well argued. You know, take it slow there, folks. Then it invariably devolves into a game of name calling, right? They're crazy, they're crazy, they're crazy, they're hype, they're whatever it is. Some of it will get adopted. There'll be a scandal, there'll be a crisis. We'll adjust, and we keep moving. So we're somewhere in that cycle. I can't tell you exactly where, but we're somewhere in that adoption to a world in which we live in a world where everything digital can become data, and all of your data may well, and for good reason, become digital. But we need to really think about what's possible and what we want to be careful about, particularly given that you all hold the power drills of evaluation. Here's two examples, and I'm only going to give you two, because I figured everybody else on this stage, all before me and everybody after me, is going to give you all kinds of great examples of the positive uses. I'm going to give you two, and then I'm going to get to the good stuff. It is possible that in an age when more and more public data and more data that might have been collected privately at some point is becoming available, machine readable, usable, analyzable, that in fact we can do better and better meta-analysis of individual programs, that we can focus on evaluating individual programs, but we can see those in larger contexts. We can compare results in one place to results from comparable data sets. The costs of doing so should be coming down. The ability to do so should be coming down. That's all good. This is an example. The Data Science for Social Good was a fellowship program held in Chicago this year for the first time. 30 some odd young, enthusiastic data scientists from around the world descended on Chicago for 10 weeks. Anybody here from Chicago? You might have noticed them. They don't hold up traffic or anything. And they worked with a variety of programs, and one of the things they did was take a large collection of the random control trial evaluations that Nurse Family Partnership has been doing for years on its own work, and look at that, the collection of those RCTs as a data set, and look at the results from that in contrast to some publicly available data they were able to just pull down at low cost. So that kind of thing is possible. And there's challenges to doing it well, but it's possible. So there's one of the things. There's a sort of, we've got an increased ability to do meta-analysis of the kinds of interventions that are happening in isolation all over the world. We also have the possibility to use the infrastructure of open data to actually share what we're learning. Why isn't there a public library of evaluations? Why aren't we sharing this stuff? Maybe you'll go build that. That would probably be a good thing. Maybe. I can find the bad thing in almost anything. So let's get to the bad stuff. Data are not democratic. It absolutely rests on you as funders, evaluators, nonprofit executives, whoever you all may be, scholars, researchers, policymakers, to know is who's in that data, who's not in that data, who's being heard, and who's not being heard. I don't care how big you tell me that data set is. I don't care how large the fire hose of Twitter streams may be. Everybody is not part of it. And if you're using that information to drive policy, you better be sure you know who's not being heard, and you better be listening to them some other way. Absolutely critical, especially as we live in places that are building more and more sensors everywhere we go. The data sets are getting bigger and bigger. That doesn't mean they're getting more democratic. Doesn't mean they're getting more representative. That's going to take deliberate action. This stuff is getting harder, folks, not easier. Most of us went through school, most of us who did go through way too much school as I did, went through it hoping we'd never have to take another statistics class. Big data doesn't make me sit up at night, you know, and with excitement, like maybe I could go find that SPSS program that I told them to put on my hard drive, but never tell me where it was, because I didn't really want to run into it in the dark. It's getting harder, not easier. The skills we need to actually do the kind of analysis that's not possible, those skills are not widely held. And in fact, the more and more commodified we make this stuff, the more dangerous it becomes, and the more we need that skills. There's a great book that sums it up in the title. It's called Program or Be Programmed. Because the easier we make it for you to use an app on your phone that draws from big data sets and tells you something, the more important it becomes that you be able to understand the algorithms that were put into that program that's doing that, so you know who's left out of it. Absolutely more and more skills necessary. It's not getting easier, it's getting harder. And as you think about how you design your evaluation work, how you design your programs, how you think about your funding, that needs to be part of your thinking. Anybody here familiar with crisis text line? I don't see a single hand. Oh, that corner of the room knows all about crisis text line. Great. So let me tell you a minute about Crisis Text Line, and I use them just because they were the ones who really brought this to my attention. Crisis Text Line is a new program. It launched this summer. It's a spin-in of the organization DoSomething.org, which has been mobilizing teens around the country for many, many years using text messages. And several years ago, they started to realize that in that extraordinary repository of data they had that were text messages from million-plus teenagers, there were a lot of kids in crisis. There were a lot of kids experiencing issues at home, issues in school. They were worried about their health. They were worried about drugs. There was all kinds of things. And being the do-gooders that they were at Do Something, they couldn't just ignore this, but nor could they jump in and do something about it, because in fact the data were text messages. They were coming to Do Something via those friendly partners everybody wants to be working with, AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint. They didn't have permission from the teens to use this information for anything other than mobilizing them to take voluntary action. They weren't able to interject themselves in the kids' crisis situation, even though that's what the kids were communicating. So anyway, they fast forward, they came up with a way to address this. They spun off this new enterprise called Crisis Text Line. And Crisis Text Line is now building text message-based systems for support line, this kind of support line, phone line company organizations to work with teens to do that via text messaging. And they're learning some incredible stuff. And it's a very, very interesting organization. They're building themselves from the data up. They're building themselves in a digital environment. And here's what their chief data scientist said to me. We're collecting a whole lot of fascinating information from our partners, the crisis counselors, from the teens themselves. For the first time, they're having conversations that go past just that first crisis intervention, because they'll do that on text messaging. That changes the whole ball game here. We're learning all this incredible stuff. We can use all that information in real time to improve our services and help the kids, or we could collect a bunch of data for the evaluation that the funder paid for. And it's a resource issue. And improving your process in real time on a regular basis changes your yearly evaluation results. It's a legitimate trade-off, and I don't think it's just Crisis Text Line's problem. And we need to think about what that's going to mean. To really be able to use data well and quickly, how are you going to balance that trade-off? So that's, I don't know, what am I up to, number 3 here? Number 4. Digital data don't stand still. One of the things that's so exciting about the era that we're in is that we are experiencing what happens when data that were collected for one purpose are made available, can be accessed and reused, and combined with other data sets and used for a different purpose. That's very cool. That's how we can learn all kinds of things that Crisis Text Line is learning. It's how come I know when my coming on my corner. But not always good things. Good things, it's not only good things that come from that kind of recombinant nature what I think of as generative nature of digital data. I'll give you an example. How many of you are from the Bay Area? Okay, how many of you are from San Francisco? Okay, I live in a part of San Francisco that when I moved there many years ago was in the part of the city that's in the biggest gap in the BART line. So I was Muni dependent to get downtown. You don't want to be Muni dependent for anything. Muni is the public bus system. BART is the train system. My neighborhood is the biggest gap in the BART line that's totally not on the BART line. And there's one Muni line that goes downtown. So it was not a high interest neighborhood when the locus of work was downtown San Francisco. I'm also about 3 blocks from an on-ramp to the highway. Things have changed a little bit in San Francisco since I moved there as to where people want to live given where they work. When I get up in the morning and walk my dogs, I am usually walking down my sidewalk and I see the same people every day, most of them doing this. And they're waiting for the Google bus, the Genentech bus, the Yahoo bus, the Apple bus. I missed one. There's another bus. They all stop on my corner. I'm waiting for Stanford to get a bus, right? The maps of those bus routes generated from the data of the companies that are now running those buses. So for those who aren't from here, these are enormous commuter buses. They're very fancy. They got Wi-Fi. They probably have espresso machines. I don't know. They stop on my corner, they offload something like 18 to 20,000 people a day, they pick them up, they keep the cars off the highway, they drive them down here to the peninsula. Those people work all day. When I walk my dog again at 11 o'clock at night, same person's getting off the bus, by the way. Good, all right. What happened with that data? Data are digital. They mapped it. For a while, there was a very nice looking graphic, floating around the city of here's all the bus stops. Those of us who live near them didn't really need a map of this. But what happened with that data? Well, Zillow swooped it up. Zillow is a real estate company that maps housing prices. Housing in the city is absurd. You put maps of available housing and bus routes that'll take you to work with Wi-Fi and an espresso machine, and the prices on those corners go through the stratosphere. Front page of today's Chronicle, supervisors think they need to do something about evictions. Yeah, supervisors, you need to do something about evictions. Now, it's not Google's fault, it's not Twitter's fault, it's not their fault that the evictions are going through the roof, and it's certainly not the data set's fault. But that's what you can do. That's the generative nature of that data. You put it out there for a certain purpose. They did that to get cars off the road, to make life conditions better for their workers. Those buses provide a lot of positive service, and there's downstream problems with what happens when you mash up that data. Here's another one. I just heard about this yesterday, much closer to the world we all live in. Has anybody heard of Simplify? Okay, so I heard about it yesterday. I don't know when it launched. It's a new effort launched by GuideStar, the Technology Affinity Group, the Oak Foundation, a few others. I'm probably missing them. I don't mean to miss it. And really, GuideStar, you're all familiar with GuideStar? Realized that they were sitting on an enormous data set that included all that information about X nonprofits, finances, their board members, their 501c3, blah, 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 all that stuff that anybody who's ever raised money from foundations has to reassemble every time the foundation wants them to assemble that stuff into a proposal. And so they've come up with a process to simplify that. You're already storing all that data on GuideStar's system. Why not make it easy to extract it and put it into a proposal form for whatever proposal you're doing? It's a great idea. It is a second generation use of digital data. By the way, it's also in GuideStar's interest to make it easier for every nonprofit in the world to manage their data on GuideStar's system. GuideStar benefits, nonprofits benefit. It's a second generation use. The data are in perpetual motion. Once you put that information out there, you don't know what people are going to do with it. You don't know what they're going to do with it, and you don't control it. And it goes on and on and on and on. This is the Medici family tree. I thought it was appropriate. I had no idea how appropriate it was when I realized I was signing away my grandson's rights to this incredibly valuable speech. But when we think about data, all of you as experienced evaluators, and the presentation so far show that this is important stuff and you take this very seriously, you're very committed to developing data collection, data analysis, data storage processes that are sensitive to the needs of community and that recognize the power imbalances, with the exception of a few people who I have already named, so I don't need to name them again, right? But what about the next generation? How far out can you actually think about, let alone predict, let alone plan for what happens with these data downstream? The answer to that question, by the way, is not very, not with any accuracy. So try honesty, is my advice when you're thinking about your policies about it. Don't tell people that you're going to keep their data anonymous and safe, because you're not. If you're putting it on the internet, you're not keeping it anonymous and you're not keeping it safe, because you don't control it. Finally, the last thing I want to say about trying to do evaluation or any kind of civil society work in a big data age is that there are some elements of our fundamental democratic process, our fundamental democratic assumptions that are really being challenged by this moment. And I know you've got more immediate, tactical, important issues to deal with in how you improve the lives of children and families and all kinds of people around the world. But I want to leave you with this one really big thought, which is that all of our systems, from our legal code to our financing systems to our political system in this country, were designed with an assumption that we actually had the freedom to operate privately on behalf of the public. That's what's at the heart of civil society, is that I can choose with whom I want to get together to do something, to make something different or better for whomever I choose. That is the heart of a nonprofit organization. It is at the heart of civil protest. It is the heart of neighborhood organizing. I'm not doing it because I need a job that makes me do it, and I'm not doing it because the government obliges me to do it. I'm doing it of my own free will, and I'm doing it as a private person, and I'm choosing who I do it with in private. And we don't do that anymore in digital civil society. We don't have that privacy. Because with whom I organize, with whom I associate, with whom I go to meetings and people put the videos up on public without telling me, or the participants list without asking my permission, that's not private. That's what all the hullabaloo about metadata in the news is about. And our fundamental right to do this and the way we do it is being challenged, and it's up to us to invent how we're going to do it going forward. It's not going to go away, I hope. I'm here to make sure it doesn't, and I think you are as well. But we cannot take for granted that the way it used to work in the analog age is the way it works in the digital age, because it doesn't. And it's up to us to make sure that we can continue to keep what's private, that needs to be private, in order for us to be public, safe. That's what's at stake when you think about your digital data policies and how you're going to collect information from people, and how you're going to respect them when you ask for their data, and how you're going to respect them when you store their data, and how you're going to respect them when you come up with algorithms and systems maps and all kinds of things to tell them if progress is being made. That's what's at stake. We're thinking about this stuff. I just put this on the slide because, in fact, I'm going to let FSG have my slides. And the very nice videographers and recorders did not stop recording when I asked them to, because I set them up in advance. And yes, I will sign your form. But I make my point, and I hope it sticks. This is serious stuff, folks. The rules have changed. The systems have changed. The ability to share information, access information, use information sets us on a whole new path with new questions. These are some of the places we're working on them at the lab where I work here at Stanford. I hope you'll join us if you're interested. I forgot to put one more link up there, which is we will be organizing an Ethics of Data conference to be held here at Stanford in September of next year, because the codes of practice across the social sector, from humanitarian aid and relief in the Philippines as I stand here, to how you think about the ethical codes of collecting data for evaluative purposes, all need to be reinvented. And I hope you'll be part of that. Thank you very much. They're all hungry. You can turn the camera off now. I mean, this is embarrassing. There's mics over there. I don't know, before you record it, make sure you're down with that.
So I used to, thank you very much, by the way, for
You're welcome.
Wonderful presentation. I used to hear a lot, especially in Europe, about data protection legislation and data protection agreements. Can you update us on what that is? Has that fallen off the vine, or is it hopeful or not hopeful?
Well, it depends on where you are. Here's the problem. Here's one of the many problems we have. My colleague Rob Reich refers to this as being operating in a 21st century world, but 21st century world with 20th century rules. The rules for data privacy and protection are written at the national level. Last time I checked, anything on the internet didn't stop at the Canadian border. So Canada has a Minister of Privacy. The European privacy protection rules are far more stringent than they are in the US. Last time I checked, the US did not have a Minister of Privacy. I mean, we don't have ministers of anything, but we don't have a Secretary of Privacy, right? So there's no consistency in the laws. They're much stricter in Europe and in Canada and other parts of the world than they are here. That's causing a lot of hand-wringing on a lot of people's parts, and there's constant multinational negotiations, but there's no sort of standard. I have written, and I believe this deeply, that for civil society, for the nonprofit sector to thrive in the 21st century, we will be defined by how we handle this information. Because I don't know about you, but I pretty much expect Facebook to serve its business interests before it serves my privacy interests. And I don't know about you, but I pretty much think the forces in favor of enhanced security are winning the argument at the government level over those in favor of my civil liberties, although there's some change being made there. So where do I, as a citizen, where do I go if I want to trust that the organization I'm interacting with is going to be honest with me about how it's using its information and respect my ownership of it? Well, I go to the same place where in the last century I went if I wanted some organization to treat me that way about my money or my time. And that's nonprofits, and that's civil society. I think there's an enormous opportunity here for nonprofit organizations to define themselves by this issue, not be defined by it. But I don't actually see it happening.
Thank you so much for a thought-provoking and very disturbing presentation.
You're very welcome.
You just mentioned one of the trade-offs that we're being asked to participate in terms of privacy versus security. I wonder if there's any good trade-offs that you see coming from this.
Sure. I mean, I think, and I'll go back to my friends at Crisis Text Line. They are, and here's a problem I think probably all of you are struggling with, so here's a conversation to be part of. We care deeply about the personal data that we collect. I think each and every person in here actually respects the people you work with and care about that. And I know that my hosts here realized what I was doing when I picked on them earlier. But here's the thing. Crisis Text Line is gathering some of the most personal information you can imagine. It's teens' health information. I mean, it doesn't get much hotter than that. I can think of a couple things, but that's about as hot as it gets, right? But in that information, they're also seeing things that, if you aggregated it, have real implications for medical research about mental health. That's a public benefit too. Serving the individual teen, absolutely public benefit. Serving the medical research community and how we think about teens' mental health, absolute public benefit. How do you have them both? And I think it's possible. I don't know the answer, but we're working on it. I will tell you again, I've said this once, I've got it on tape. If they tell you it's anonymous and if they tell you it's safe, they're lying.
Hi, thank you so much. As a independent evaluator and informaticist, I'm
Informaticist.
really,
I like the word.
well, I go by data scientist now because informaticist.
No,
I don't understand
informaticist
as
is
much.
way better.
But anyway, you like it? Okay. I'll take that on advisement. So, I'm one of those people that's really down up to my elbows in the data and everything, and that in my work with clients, I find that I need to do a lot of educating about data. And so for folks like us who are in my position where we have an opportunity, we kind of know under the hood, but we want to try to make the changes you're talking about. What are the things we can be doing to try to use data for good and try to influence the use of data for good?
So this incredibly wise advice comes from Hank Greeley, who's a faculty member at Stanford Law School and the head of this Law Center for Bioethics, as well as my mother and my kindergarten teacher. You can be honest about how it works. It's amazing how much we just don't know about how these systems work. So the educational process is going to be enormous. This is a resource that doesn't work like all the resources we've built all our systems about for thousands of years. Digital data doesn't work the same way analog data does, right? Here's analog data. I have the pen and you can't have it. We've built an entire economy about this. I have the pen and you can't have it. In the digital world, we can all have the pen. So there's a lot of deep educational issues that are necessary. I think I think some of the issues about the voices that are not being heard are more important now than ever before, because we think, my God, there's 220 million people on Twitter. We know what they need in the Bayview. Well, first of all, 60% of the people on Twitter are not in the US, so they're certainly not in the Bayview, right? So there's some sort of gap-filling parts that I think are incredibly important.
Hey, sorry. Sasha Littman from Measuring Success. Hi, Lucy. Thank you for the really stimulating presentation. I want to encourage you, if possible, to have a little bit of a conversation with Pat's presentation from earlier, because one of the things that we're seeing with the shared measurement systems that we've been building for a lot of the clients is the opportunity to stitch together, of course, data from social services, school systems, all the private nonprofit providers, in order to really help the progress of the child or the other outcomes that we want to achieve. And obviously, one of the ways to deal with that is to ensure that, as Pat showed earlier, anytime you show that data publicly, you only show it in the aggregate, and that for any of these warm handoffs, you ensure that they're done on a basis that is approved by the individuals. That is, they have to give approval for their information to be shifted. What do you think are the unintended issues there that you think are going to come forth, and that you want people like Pat and others of us that are working on these shared measurement systems to take into account?
Two things, and I was very impressed with that, and I think that's exactly right, that there's that full closed loop, if you will, from collecting the data to sharing it with people and gathering that. I just hope that's not actually the closing of the loop, and I didn't hear that. That should be the beginning of the loop, right? That's the beginning of the analysis, and the work finding is to engage people in it. The one other thing, I think, just like my experience here, is to recognize that this idea of you owning the data, you said knitting together data from the school systems and the health providers, and that, is it really your data? Whose data is it? Start there. Start there when you think about your policies. Start there when you think about your analysis. So those are the two things I'd say. I mean, there's great work happening. I'm not actually all gloom and doom. Mostly all gloom and doom. But that's the answer.